Welcome to the TheMediaWard podcast. Where is everybody? That was the question posed by the famous physicist Enrico Fermi whilst sat eating lunch at the New Mexico-based Los Alamos National Laboratory. There are up to 400 billion stars in our galaxy, and as many as 2 trillion galaxies in the universe. Just within our galaxy alone, there are potentially 6 billion Earth-like planets, and in the universe as a whole, as many as 12 quintillion. That's a 12 with 30 zeros after it. With all of these potential places for life to spring from, the odds of planet Earth being the only one that has produced life seem vanishingly small. And yet, as far as we can tell, we are indeed alone in the universe. This is the basis for the Fermi Paradox. Fermi was an accomplished physicist, earning such accolades as a Nobel Prize for his work in nuclear physics. He participated in the early phases of the Manhattan Project, the mostly American push towards nuclear power and in turn nuclear weapons, although he was a staunch opponent to the use of the latter. Fermi, however, didn't actually publish any works on his paradox. In fact, it was about 20 years after his death that the Fermi Paradox was so named. The Fermi Paradox grew into the phenomenon it is today via a number of other scientists' work, namely Michael Hart and Frank Tipler. However, Fermi's name was the one that stuck. In 1961, an American astrophysicist, Frank Drake, proposed a formula to estimate the number of detectable alien civilizations that we should expect throughout our galaxy. It combines average rate of star formations, fraction of stars with planets, average number of those planets that could potentially support life, fraction of those that develop life at some point, fraction of that life that evolves intelligence, fraction of intelligent life that releases detectable signs into space, divided by the amount of time they release those signals. The first few elements of the equation are factors we have some understanding of. Through decades of observation, we have developed an understanding of star formation rates, and through some groundbreaking science, improved our understanding of the frequency of exoplanets and their makeup. We are a long way from knowing everything in these arenas, don't get me wrong, but we aren't just guessing either. But when we get to the parts of the formula which concern life of any kind, we can only estimate these, and realistically, our estimations must be based on our knowledge of life on Earth and how it has evolved. An astronomer, Jill Tarter, eloquently put it, the Drake equation is a wonderful way to organise our ignorance. The search for extraterrestrial life has mainly been focused on picking up electromagnetic radiation, using large radio telescopes to detect incoming signals potentially indicating intelligent life. Using Earth as a model, it's thought that another intelligent life form would intentionally, or otherwise, send radio signals out from their planet in the same way that our television and radio networks do from Earth. Our arrays of radio telescopes pick up many incoming radio signals, but so far these have all been natural occurrences. From rapidly spinning neutron stars which blast out electromagnetic radiation to entire galaxies that emit radio waves. The radio telescopes make up the bulk of the passive methods of seeking out alien life, but there are also more proactive methods. Numerous messages have been sent towards some of our neighbouring star cluster, as well as a number of probes, but to no avail. The universe continues to be devoid of life, as far as we can tell. Perhaps that's not such a bad thing. Human history has far too many horrifying examples of a more technologically advanced civilization encroaching upon a less advanced one. It doesn't usually go well for the native population. Given all the planets in the universe, and the assumption that Earth isn't unique in being able to support intelligent life, the logical conclusion is that alien civilizations exist. Since the question was posed, many theories have been floated to explain the absence of contact. One of the most famous is the Great Filter. Robin Hanson, an economist, proposed a 9-step process that would lead to an interstellar civilization being formed. The steps required are: begin in a habitable star system, generate reproductive molecules, for example RNA, evolve prokaryotic single-cell life, such as bacteria or some varieties of plankton, evolve eukaryotic single-cell life, such as yeast, develop sexual reproduction, evolve multicellular life, evolve animals capable of tool use, develop an industrial civilization, and then wide-scale colonization on an interplanetary or interstellar scale. The Great Filter theory concludes that one or more of these stages is highly improbable, limiting the overall likelihood of life developing to the level where we might notice it. If the filter is an early step, say the jump from inorganic material to single-cell life, then Earth is a rarity and humanity simply beat the odds. If the filter is a later stage, say between an industrial civilization and colonizing other worlds, where humanity is right now, then we will either run into an insurmountable challenge, or, as our technology improves, cause our own extinction. Given that humanity built enough nuclear weapons to exterminate all life on our planet many times over in just a few short years, the latter is an easily imaginable solution to Fermi's paradox. If the filter is one of the early steps, it could be the case that Earth is the only planet with life. If the filter is closer to the middle stages, it could be that there are many planets teeming with life but none of it advanced. If the filter is one of the later stages, then the universe could plausibly be filled with advanced life, but all of them self-destruct before reaching out beyond their immediate surroundings. The universe could well be a graveyard of dead planets, with the ruins of long-forgotten civilizations. Or, taking a slightly more optimistic view, the universe could be full of advanced civilizations, none of whom can travel all that far or desire to. Space is vast. And as our current understanding of physics dictates, there's a speed limit. Our closest neighbouring star is Proxima Centauri, a little over 4.2 light-years away, or about 40 trillion kilometres. As of 2018, NASA's Parker Solar Probe is the fastest human-made object, clocking in at around 340,000 kilometres per hour, but it will hit nearly 700,000 kilometres per hour in 2024. This is achieved through multiple gravity assist maneuvers, where the spacecraft essentially takes energy from planets as it passes them and slingshots away. If we manage to get a spacecraft up to that speed, 700,000 km per hour, and point it towards Proxima Centauri, it will still take over 6,500 years to get there. Safe to say, with our current technology, we couldn't get to our nearest neighbour in any kind of reasonable time frame. With further technological advances, we will almost inevitably develop craft capable of higher speeds, but assuming our current understanding of physics is accurate, it is simply not possible to travel faster than the speed of light. Assuming Einstein's special theory of relativity is correct, that's the one with the rather famous E=mc² formula, as an object gets closer and closer to the speed of light, its mass increases, so the energy required to accelerate it increases exponentially. In effect, this means that you can't ever get to the speed of light, let alone exceed it. This applies to both spacecraft and signals. It would be exceedingly resource intensive to travel between star systems, and even if a civilization was willing to deploy the resources to send colony ships on such a long and costly journey, the lag in communications would make managing a colony impractical. Let's say humanity has been able to set up a colony on a planet around Proxima Centauri, our nearest neighbour. Even if technology had advanced to an incredible level, and trips to the new colony could be accomplished within a human lifetime, the communication lag would still persist. It would take over 4 years for any message sent from Earth to reach this new colony, and another 4 years for them to reply. In the 8.5-year round trip any message would take, the culture of the people sending it would develop. There would therefore be no practical way to govern a colony remotely. It would have to be entirely autonomous. It wouldn't be possible to expand consistently outwards and have a homogeneous society that spanned multiple star systems. Every offshoot would quickly evolve into its own society, entirely distinct from the original. If a civilization is never able to expand further than its home system, or rather, doesn't have a good reason to attempt to, the odds of them travelling far enough to interact with other civilizations, such as ourselves, is vastly reduced. Of course, this is all based on our current understanding of physics and the inherent speed limit that goes along with it. Should a method of travel that's faster than light become possible, these problems would disappear. If we go back to Drake's formula, the formula for estimating how many alien civilizations we should be able to detect at any one time, the final variable is the length of time that they are producing detectable signals. Our galaxy, the Milky Way, is around 100,000 light-years in diameter. For argument's sake, let's say we receive a signal from an alien civilization 10,000 light-years away. because of the light speed limits, that message would have been sent 10,000 years ago. A hell of a lot can change in 10,000 years, so it seems likely that civilization that sent the message would be extinct, if our own human history is anything to go by. Consider the fact that within a handful of years of inventing nuclear weapons, we have had several close calls with global annihilation. We have seen disease spread across the ever more connected planet and are fast approaching irreversible climate change, if that tipping point hasn't already been reached. In light of all that, it's not far-fetched to imagine that human civilization won't be around in 10,000 years. If we assume that alien civilizations face similar pitfalls as human ones, not to mention the threat of natural disasters such as asteroid impact, then it's also fair to conclude that any messages that we did receive would have come from alien civilizations that were long gone. Assuming that faster-than-light travel isn't possible, and that the massive resources required for interstellar colonization are simply too costly to be viable, then civilizations may fall back onto another concept: von Neumann probes. Mathematician John von Neumann suggested the concept of self-replicating, autonomous machines for use in colonization. A civilization would send out a number of probes that would be programmed to travel to other solar systems and harvest natural resources. They would use these resources to self-replicate, to build more probes, so they could spread further and harvest more resources. This method of space exploration has its advantages. The initial resource investment would be less, offsetting the fact that any potential benefits would likely only be realized by future generations. These probes could be programmed to simply spread, or they could be programmed to send resources back to the home world or to pre-build colonies. Equipping these probes with the intelligence to autonomously harvest resources and replicate themselves requires an incredible level of complexity, which raises some potential ethical and moral questions. In programming rules for the probes to follow, you might be inclined to instruct them to not harvest a planet if it has life forms on it. But if the probes reach a planet that has life forms which are so drastically different from its creators that it doesn't recognize them as alive, then they might harvest resources regardless. The creators of the probe might have unwittingly created self-replicating robots that would slowly but surely spread throughout the galaxy, exterminating life as they go. With the level of intelligence that the probes would require, it's also feasible that they would be complex enough to have what we might consider sentience or individuality. If so, you might on occasion end up with a probe that is a little psychotic and will intentionally ignore directives to not harm discovered life. It's plausible that the probe's creators could even intentionally create killer probes that will self-replicate and extinguish any life they find. It's entirely plausible that these killer probes could turn on the creators too. The self-replicating robots turned killer robots is a common trope within science fiction, but that doesn't necessarily mean it couldn't happen under certain circumstances. We've gone through a few rather dark potential answers to Fermi's paradox, but now let's take a look at some of the slightly less existentially bleak options. The general assumption is that the Earth is not unique, and if it had all the ingredients needed to birth life, then countless other planets must do as well. But what if that's not the case? What if the Earth is exceedingly rare and the exact circumstances that created life are in fact unique? Through some truly incredible scientific study, we've been able to locate and study a great many exoplanets, planets that are not within our solar system. Due to the remoteness of these planets, however, our understanding of their composition is necessarily limited. Given that we also have a limited understanding of the steps that were required for life to spring up on Earth, it's clear that we can't be entirely sure whether any particular exoplanet could sustain life or not. The Earth's composition, a thin crust on top of a molten layer of rock, creates plate tectonics. As the plates move, they create volcanic activity, which periodically releases CO2 into the atmosphere. This has kept Earth's atmosphere relatively consistent and temperatures within tolerable ranges. That's not to say that the Earth's climate has always been so mild and pleasant. Two periods when the Earth was very cold and covered in ice occurred roughly 2.2 billion and 635 million years ago. These two periods, however, line up with key developments in life on Earth. The snowball Earth period, 2.2 billion years ago, coincided with the development of photosynthesis, the process by which plants use energy from the sun to convert CO2 in the air into oxygen. The latter period, 625 million years ago, coincided with the Cambrian explosion, a burst of diversification of species. It's possible that plate tectonics and those specific cold stages are required for life to form, or one of many other specific conditions that might be unique to Earth. Our moon is potentially a unique factor as well. The moon acts as a bouncer, taking the hit from a lot of the incoming asteroids that might pose a threat to life on our planet. However, more recent studies have shown that both plate tectonics and large moons may not be as rare as first thought. It's clear that we have a long way to go in understanding the composition of exoplanets and the features of Earth which have led to life forming. So right now, we just don't know whether our planet is rare and special or not. We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. It's all too easy to end up cooking the same meals day after day, grabbing a ready meal from the freezer, or worse still, resorting to takeaway after takeaway. Thankfully, HelloFresh is the perfect way to change all of this. You can get mouth-watering recipes with pre-proportioned, fresh, high-quality ingredients delivered directly to your door. No fighting your way through the supermarket aisles. No pulling a rather unappetizing ready meal out of your freezer. Instead, you'll get delicious recipes like salmon teriyaki skewers with miso stir-fried greens and sesame wedges, or turmeric roasted cauliflower with a lentil and coconut dal. Every week, there is a huge variety of tasty recipes, and you can choose what works for you. Whether you're a meat lover or more a fan of the veggies, HelloFresh has you covered. If you want to get 50% off your first box and 35% off of your next 3 boxes, you can find a referral link in the show notes. You'll also be helping the podcast out. Right, back to the show. The firstborn hypothesis says that we may well be special, but we aren't unique. Well, at least not for long. The universe is around 13.8 billion years old, and the Earth was formed around 4.6 billion years ago. This feels like the rest of the universe should have had a head start, having billions of years to create a habitable planet, life to spring up, and that life to advance, but that's not quite the case. A 2015 study using data from the Hubble and Kepler space telescopes suggests Earth was in fact a bit of an early bloomer. When the Earth formed, only around 8% of the potentially habitable worlds that have ever or will ever exist in the universe had formed. The universe as it is now and the universe 4 billion years ago is vastly different. A lot has changed in that time, and perhaps the early universe was a harsher place than it is now. Perhaps we are living in a transitional phase where the conditions are ripe for life to spring up. We've mentioned the possibility that the Earth isn't special, and neither is humanity, but there are contradicting philosophies. For example, the anthropic principle proposes that it is possible, even in a vast and diverse universe, for an observer to witness a special place and time. In our search for potential habitable exoplanets, one of the things we're looking for is the presence of liquid water. To the best of our knowledge, water is required to sustain life. Of course, there is such a thing as too much of a good thing, and this is where the water world theory comes in. Water may cover around 70% of the Earth's surface, but it only accounts for 0.02% of its mass. This ratio is probably quite rare within the universe. If a world has liquid water, odds are that it will have significantly more water than Earth, and therefore no dry land mass. Animals evolving to use tools is generally regarded as a fundamental evolutionary step towards civilization, but the aquatic environment is simply not conducive to tool use. Water worlds where at least 50% of the planet's mass is water, a ratio that is theorized to be relatively common, are comprised of a rocky core, a thick layer of ice, and then a layer of liquid water several kilometers deep. The issue that this would cause is that even if the rocky core had a liquid rock component, no geothermal exchange with the liquid ocean could occur due to the thick layer of insulating ice. The geothermal vents on our ocean floors are believed to be critical for the forming of early life, and these simply wouldn't exist on these vast ocean worlds. Even assuming that this wasn't a necessity, the kind of life that might emerge from a water world might not be the kind to evolve to the stage of civilization building. As American scientist and science fiction writer David Brin put it, most intelligent species in the universe might possess the outlook of whales, and never conceive of radio or travel to the stars. From water worlds to water worlds with an icy crust, This theory disputes the idea that life is most likely to form on rocky exoplanets, and suggests that we should instead be looking towards exoplanets with water on them, but also an ice crust. To find these types of planetary bodies, we don't even need to look outside of our solar system. They exist a lot closer to home. A number of the moons of the outer gas giant planets are suspected to have liquid water oceans under the thick crusts of ice. One of the better studied examples is Europa, one of Jupiter's moons. It is thought to have a rocky core with a liquid ocean and then an ice crust. Evidence to support this has come from probe flybys, showing plumes of water escaping from Europa's ice crust. If the water underneath the ice crust has enough energy to burst through cracks, then it indicates there is geothermal activity occurring where the rocky core meets the liquid ocean. Based on this evidence, conditions on Europa may well be supportive of life. If this were the case, this would expand the criteria for exoplanets that we deem potential platforms for life. There are upcoming planned missions to get a closer look at Europa, namely NASA's Europa Clipper mission that aims to place a probe in orbit of Jupiter and perform a number of low-altitude flybys of Europa. As with the previous water-world answer to the Fermi Paradox, the same issue applies. Life that did evolve in a subsurface ocean would be unlikely to attain a state of technological advancement that would generate detectable signals for us to pick up on. This is explained rather eloquently by Charles Lineweaver of the Planetary Science Institute of the Australian National University. The most intelligent protostome is probably the octopus. After 600 million years of independent evolution and despite their big brains, octopi do not seem to be on the verge of building radio telescopes. We've mentioned that we might need to expand our criteria of habitability in our search for potentially habitable exoplanets. Conversely, there are other theories that argue we might need to narrow those criteria instead. The Aurora Hypothesis gets its name from a 2015 science fiction novel by Kim Stanley Robinson. An interstellar generation ship is attempting to colonize a moon, but shortly after disembarking, the crew begin to die due to exposure to a primitive life form of prions. Prions are a form of protein that can transmit their physical properties to other proteins, which in humans can cause serious problems. The general idea is that just because a planetary body is habitable, it doesn't guarantee that it's habitable for intelligent life. This could mean that a fair proportion of planets we assume are habitable could indeed have life on them, and yet not be supportive of complex intelligent life. Due to the distances involved when we are examining exoplanets, detecting signs of basic life forms is significantly more difficult than more complex life forms. The Aurora Hypothesis also has consequences for any alien civilization that might be looking to expand and colonize. If the number of potentially settleable planets is far less than we thought, and the truly settleable options are difficult to identify from a distance, the odds of interstellar colonization diminish significantly. These factors would again reduce the likelihood of detection by humanity. Our last few theories put forth explanations for Fermi's paradox that revolve around there being no life, or only life that is too primitive to be capable of space travel. The dark forest hypothesis goes in the other direction, that the universe actually has no shortage of advanced extraterrestrial civilizations, but they're all keeping quiet, and with good reason. This idea originates with the science fiction writer Liu Cixin, and is summarized by a character in one of his books. The universe is a dark forest. Every civilization is an armed hunter stalking through the trees like a ghost, gently pushing aside branches that block the path and trying to tread without sound. Even breathing is done with care. The hunter has to be careful because everywhere in the forest are stealthy hunters like him. If he finds other life, another hunter, an angel or a demon, a delicate infant or a tottering old man, a fairy or a demigod, there's only one thing he can do: open fire and eliminate them. In this forest, hell is other people. An eternal threat that any life that exposes its own existence will be swiftly wiped out. This is the picture of cosmic civilization. It's the explanation for the Fermi Paradox. This conclusion is based on two assumptions. Namely, the primary purpose of any civilization is survival, and civilizations continually expand and grow, but there are limited resources in the universe. The constant struggle to expand coupled with limited resources, will inevitably pit any and all civilizations against each other. This notion doesn't by itself mean conflict is inevitable, but mix in the chains of suspicion, as Liu Cixin puts it, and war is the only logical outcome of two spacefaring civilizations meeting. The chains of suspicion arise because of the difficulty of communication, because any two civilizations would likely to be based far apart. Without a shared language, communication would be exceedingly difficult and time-consuming. Even a benevolent civilization, which still values its own survival, would be forced to assume any other life forms could be a threat to them. Without the ability to communicate clearly, these fears could not easily be resolved. Assuming that faster-than-light travel is an impossibility, even the most aggressive of alien civilizations may be reluctant to send out an invading force. If you locate an alien civilization, decide that you would like to take control of their planet, and send an armada of warships to do so, you are still highly disadvantaged by the lengthy timescales of interstellar travel. Even space travel at a good fraction of the speed of light could take hundreds or thousands of years. In that time frame, your warships would stay at the same level of technological advancement, whilst the enemy that you are targeting can use that time to advance and bolster their defences. Under these circumstances, any intelligent alien civilization would be justified in choosing to keep a low profile, and do their best to remain undetected. This would explain how the universe could be teeming with life, yet appearing to be devoid of it. Another theory that would lead to a universe full of silent life is the S01E04 hypothesis. Earth has many examples of life forms that will enter a dormant state to preserve themselves during times of hardship. If this occurs under cold conditions, it's known as hibernation. Occurring under hot conditions is known as estivation. The S01E04 hypothesis suggests that alien races exist and are alive, but are estivating, waiting for more favourable conditions. The theory assumes that in the universe's 13.8 billion year history, many advanced intergalactic civilizations would have sprung up. These civilizations would be forced to estivate due to the practicalities of harvesting the unimaginable amounts of energy and processing vast amounts of data that would be required to sustain such advanced civilizations. Processing information, computing, uses energy, and as a byproduct, heat is generated. At the scales that an intergalactic civilization would be operating at, that level of heat generation is a serious concern and needs to be dissipated. The universe is steadily getting cooler. As the universe expands, energy is dissipated, and the background energy levels of the universe will taper off. Long before the so-called heat death of the universe, there would be a time where the background heat levels are lower than now, but the universe would still be perfectly habitable. Cooler conditions would enable more heat to be dissipated back into the universe, allowing for more overall computation. This could be an optimal time for a super advanced civilization to emerge out of their dormant state, now that they could do more computations, whilst having greater opportunity to offload that excess heat into the universe background. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Arthur C. Clarke, the famed science fiction writer, coined that phrase in 1962. I think that idea is one that is important to keep in mind as we delve into the subsequent potential answers to the Fermi Paradox. The transcension hypothesis is the theory that as civilizations become more and more advanced, they may choose to shed their physical forms and exist solely in a digital realm. This would theoretically leave very little trace, as any homeworld of this civilization would by nature be an entirely insular planet, not sending out signals to the physical world because they are no longer part of it. Taking this idea further, rather than an alien society perpetually expanding outwards, they may expand inwards. Our own technological advancements has followed a path of miniaturization in the pursuit of increased efficiency, as opposed to outright expansion. If you consider the continuous miniaturization of transistors that has allowed for consistent advancements in electronics, and extend that process into the future, we may even find ourselves focused on an ever-increasing efficiency, with less of a drive to expand outwards towards the stars. There's no shortage of responses to Fermi's paradox, but this is the last one I'm going to bring you today, and it's really quite the head trip. There are a number of theories that all of humanity might in fact be living inside of a simulation. Now, this sounds utterly absurd, right? Well, maybe, or maybe not. The famous astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson has stated that he thinks the odds of it being true are better than 50-50. Applying this theory to the Fermi Paradox yields some interesting conclusions. If a simulation is being run, logically, by an advanced alien civilization, and all of humanity is inside, then it makes sense to limit humanity's motivations to explore space. A simulation encompassing all of the Earth would take a truly mind-blowing amount of computing power, but if we spread to other planets, let alone other star systems, more and more computing power would be required to sustain the simulation. Maintaining the impression of being alone in the galaxy would go away to deterring or preventing any form of interplanetary colonization. When you add in the speed limit of light speed, the sheer vastness of the universe, and the immense resources required for the undertaking, you then have a fairly effective means of keeping your simulated population in one place. Testing this theory is all but impossible, as are a great many possible answers to the Fermi Paradox. Humanity has been looking to the stars for eons, and contemplating our place in the universe. This sense of intrigue and quest for understanding are experienced by the layperson, the scientist, and the religious alike. The questions raised here have no answers, at least currently, and no clear path towards getting them. Perhaps tomorrow we will get our answers, maybe in a few decades, or perhaps we never will. But in the meantime, it remains a fascinating subject for speculation and contemplation. If you like the podcast, you might like my YouTube channel. Find it at youtube.com/TheMediaWard. If you want to support the podcast, please rate it, subscribe, or share it with a friend. It all helps more than you might imagine. If you want to be even more amazing, perhaps you might consider supporting me on Patreon. There you'll find ad-free episodes, get access to episodes 2 weeks early, meaning the next episode is already available for patrons, and on top of that, one extra episode every season. You'll also get access to behind-the-scenes content for the YouTube channel, such as extended cuts and bloopers. You can find me at patreon.com/TheMediaWard. I'd like to thank St. Valentine Music for providing all of the music you've heard in today's episode. For a full list of my sources, please visit the website at themediaward.co.uk. And one last thing. Parkes Observatory in Australia is part of the effort to listen to the universe and try and extract any artificial signals that might be passing by. From as early as the 1990s, they'd been picking up curiously artificial signals that initially appeared to be coming from deep space. Almost immediately, it was discovered that these mystery signals were not originating from deep space, but instead were from some form of Earth-based interference, yet they continued to puzzle the researchers. Various theories were floated from aircraft to ball lightning, but none could be verified. Until finally, in 2015, some light was shed on the matter. Having noticed that the mystery signals were usually detected around lunchtime, researchers eventually identified the culprit: a microwave. Specifically, a microwave operated by someone who was a little impatient. When in use, the design of a microwave stops the microwave radiation from leaking out. But if you open the door before it turns off, for a moment the microwave radiation will escape before being shut off. This is in no way dangerous, but it is a strong enough signal to be picked up by the incredibly sensitive radio telescopes. And one more last thing. I generally try and keep my content fairly neutral, but I can't help but chip in on this one. In my opinion, faster-than-light travel isn't possible, and that coupled with the vastness of space means that while there are almost certainly alien civilizations out there, they are all pretty much isolated in their home system. What do you think?